From many places we have come, with hearts broken open by grief and love, we have come, seeking solace and friends to share our memories, we have come. Through the door and through the web, we have come to this sacred space, a witness to the sorrows and joys of generations, a vessel for our laughter and our tears. We come together in this sacred time, each of us a part of Sam's life and community, bound together through the bonds of friendship and the passage of time. Spirit of life and love, God of those who love and mourn, be with us in this time, be with us in this place, as we remember and celebrate the life of Sam Berliner III. Good afternoon and welcome. I am the Reverend Heather Janulis, and it is my great honor to serve as the parish minister here at the Winchester Unitarian Society. On behalf of our congregation and Sam's beloved family, whether here in person or attending via our live stream, I welcome each and all to this celebration of his life. Together we will receive a great gift, as Sam designed much of this service himself. I thank him for the care and attention he brought to each element. Before we continue the service, I wish to make you aware of a few things. For those who are attending via the live stream, you can find a PDF of the Memorial Order of Service on the front page of our website. Go to winchesteruu.org and look in the upper right-hand corner. After the service, there will be a reception outdoors on our bell tower terrace. Those who are here in the congregation, I hope that you will join us. Our tech deck requires use of the Wi-Fi in the building. For those in the sanctuary, this would be a good time to turn off your cell phone completely. We thank Sean Yun for serving as our live stream coordinator today. In the event of a positive COVID test soon after today's service, please contact our office so we may follow our contact tracing protocols. Let us continue our service by lighting the chancel chalice. In our gathering, let us remember that we are not alone. While we have come to remember and celebrate one life, we carry the weight of other losses. Holding grief for many and grief for one is natural. Remembering others in our cloud of witnesses is natural too. As a symbol of the many ways Samuel Berliner III touched our lives, and in honor of countless others, also gone but not forgotten, we kindle the chalice flame. I now invite Sam's grandchildren, Natalie and Eric, to dedicate and light our chalice. The words for dedication are by Sam, yet drawn from the works of Shakespeare and Webster Kitchell.
Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow careens at this frantic pace from day to day, to the last syllable of recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted friends, the way to life and love. On, brief candle. Life's a blazing gallop, a great player, that soars and glorifies his hours upon the stage, and then is heard ere more. It is a tale told by the wise, full of sound and fury, signifying everything.
Invictus by William Ernst Henley. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeoning of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears, looms the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Please stand for the doxology.
Visitors to our congregation's building will notice a name that appears many times on our brick pathways. These pathways are by the bell tower terrace, so you can see them at the reception. One brick reads, Sam Berlinger III, G.O.D. Lest we think that Sam suffered delusions of grandeur, I learned that he signed his letters to his daughters with this acronym meaning good old dad. Another reads, Celebrating Sam Berlinger III, 1934 to 2020, and our years together. Love, Lilia, given by his wife, the Reverend Lilia Cuervo. And yet another, in memory of Sam Berlinger, Harris Gibson, another cherished member of the Winchester Unitarian Society, who you'll hear from shortly. Those who observe these small memorial dedications will learn that we who are gathered here today, what we know, Sam Berlinger III was loved by many. I count myself as someone who deeply cared for Sam. I first met Sam when I arrived at the congregation in 2015, and he was a relative newcomer. Later, it was my joy to welcome him into membership. Over time, I grew to know Sam as somewhat of a paradox, a member of the religious unorthodox who cared deeply about the culture and customs of congregational life, a regular contrarian whose challenge and bluster shielded, as it so often does, a tender heart and spirit. I'm glad that even though we often disagreed about things, there was an authentic respect and affection between us. I, too, remember Sam and remember him with love. Sam and I sometimes had one-on-one conversations, but in some ways I got to know him through the group conversations we would often have after worship services. Sam was a faithful attendee of these gatherings, and as we each explored ideas raised by the service, his responses were often interwoven by reflections from his many years of life. This is just a piece of his life story. As Sam often made clear, he was not Sam Berlinger, but Sam Berlinger III. Sam Berlinger is my father, he would say. Sam Berlinger III was born to Sam Berlinger Jr. and Margit Szent-Viani on February 15, 1934. Margit is the Hungarian form of the name Gretchen. His family's connection to Hungary was later one of the many things that made Sam such a committed supporter of our partner church ministries, connecting with culturally Hungarian Unitarians in Romania. On Sam's personal website, one can find an account of his ancestry in his own words. He writes, My own family background is directly traced to Posen, Prussia, now Poznań, Poland, many generations back, around 1700, from whence the family came here around 1850 as persons of some means. The family was into running clipper ships. Unfortunately, they stayed with this long past the ascendancy of steam. My father and grandfather were well-known Manhattan funeral directors, very active in professional, fraternal, and civic affairs, and often pictured on the front page of the New York Times, leading a funeral of some famous personage, such as Governor Lehman or Babe Ruth. The family legend is that my forebears were court tailors in Prussia. When Frederick der Grosse moved the capital of Prussia from Potsdam to Berlin in 1701, the family had to move with the court to keep its custom, becoming the court tailors of Berlin, and the name stuck. The Berliners were Jewish, with Sam's grandfather a prominent leader in the local synagogue. However, the cultural practices of his Jewish community never resonated with Sam. From an early age, Sam experienced somewhat of an earth-based spirituality. During one trip to Lake Raquette in the Adirondacks, he commandeered a boat without his parents' knowledge, eventually inspiring them to contact the police to find their missing son. His reason, he explained, once he was found, was that he was enchanted with nature. Childhood was not always easy for Sam, as he was often sickly, a very thin boy with poor motor skills. Sam also faced a difficult loss when his younger sister, Patsy, died in his presence from an illness. The family eventually welcomed a third child, another sister named Peggy. Sam and Peggy enjoyed a close and playful relationship throughout their lives, contacting each other almost every day as adults and remaining good friends into their shared elder years. I remember the Sunday Sam came forward to light a candle, having learned of Peggy's death the night before. He chuckled when he lit the candle, and it immediately went out, thinking this is exactly something that Peggy would do. Sam was committed to education. After graduating from Lawrence High School in Lawrence, New York, throughout his life he studied at MIT, Champlain College, Rensselaer Polytechnical Institute, the University of Maryland, and Adelphi College. In Sam's personal life, he met and courted Nancy Sarah Robbins. They married on April 18th, 1957. Another loss befell the Berliner family when Sam's father died. Sam was offered the opportunity to take over the funeral home business, as his father did, but it wasn't his calling. Sam tried to strike out on his own, forming his own business, but it eventually folded. In Sam's memorial service notes, he concludes with a number of ways he has been blessed. The first blessing was 4 careers in which I was paid to do what I love. I apologize to Sam for leaving out some detail in the interest of time. Number 1, certified ordnance proof director at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland. Number 2, manager of support services for Paul Corporation and its subsidiary Aircraft Porous Media. Number 3, director of technical services for Heat Systems Ultrasonics, developing new and improved ultrasonic devices for changing materials, including U.S. patent numbers 5032027 for an ultrasonic fluid processing method and 5026167 for an ultrasonic fluid processing system, and 4, independent consultant in ultrasonic processing. What a blessing. Beyond rewarding work, there were additional loves in Sam's life. Sam and Nancy Sarah welcomed 2 children into the family, first Nancy and then Elizabeth or Beth. And Sam eventually found a faith community that brought him great meaning. Sam's entrance into Unitarian Universalism began when his mother brought him to a service at All Souls Church in New York City. Later, Sam and Nancy Sarah decided to check out Shelter Rock in New York. As Sam often recalled, on their first Sunday, they weren't quite sure what door to enter. They tried one door, but it was locked. Eventually, someone unlocked the door and greeted them. Once it was confirmed that this was the Shelter Rock congregation and that the service was about to begin, the person who welcomed them asked if they would be willing to usher that day. Nancy, Sarah, and Sam resonated with the service and eventually became active at the Lay-Led Fellowship in Muttontown. Sam twice served as congregational president and enthusiastically engaged the fellowship's partner church relationship with a church in Bordeaux, Transylvania. Sam then faced a difficult chapter in his life, beginning with the conclusion of his marriage with Nancy Sarah after 25 years. It was hard living on his own after the divorce. Sam then entered a second marriage, which was short-lived and unhappy. At this time, he was also helping manage the affairs of his aging mother, who died unexpectedly. Sam had met a number of Unitarian Universalist leaders in New York, one of whom was Lilia Cuervo, who eventually answered a call to the ministry. Beginning with their acquaintance in 1980, later when Lilia was in seminary, Sam regularly reached out to her about preaching at the Muttontown Fellowship. This professional relationship developed into a friendship, which became the bedrock of what would become his next and final partnership. In a moment, I will invite my colleague and friend Lilia to share more about who Sam was. I close with sharing the rest of Sam's blessings. Blessed. Massive websites on ultrasonics and on many varied personal interests, especially technology and the history of technology, with resultant worldwide correspondence. Blessed. Extensive hobby interests including HO and Z scale model railroading, with many good friends of like minds. Blessed. A unique understanding of how the cosmos functions and how human existence fits therein, plus a religious denomination that can accept unorthodox views. Blessed. A great sister and brother-in-law, a wonderful ex-wife, several fine friends, 2 fabulous children, 2 fantastic grandchildren, and finally, but hardly least, a dear, sweet, generous, loving wife and companion. He concludes by asking, how blessed can a man be?
Goodwill to all men. Negro, Catholic, Protestant, Jew, race, religion, large or few. Live together, live in peace. Do not scorn nor treat like geese, any color, any creed, and with them help plant friendship's seed. Prejudice must leave this earth, then true brotherhood shall have birth. Peace on earth, goodwill to men, the Bible said. And then Abe Lincoln freed those enslaved. He helped the racial road be paved. Again we fly through time and space. We, the people, meant it one race. Live in peace, democracy's aim, prove the people are the same. This lovely and profound statement of social justice and democracy, this serious admonition to humans to live in peace, written by the 12-year-old Samuel Berliner III, was a harbinger of what his budding activist and prophet would become. A person who, throughout the many roles he had in his life, tried both to fight for the rights of others and to share his knowledge, even when his well-intentioned actions in trying to use that knowledge to right wrongs were counterproductive. In the hundreds of letters to editors, to heads of corporations, to US presidents, and countless others, he ran the gamut from simply mentioning spelling mistakes to pointing out mistakes and ways to correct them to people in the science, technological, and recreational fields. Although most of his corrections and expressions of grievance were done with kindness, some were done with force and fury. To the president of Taco Bell, he wrote, I just took my 5-year-old granddaughter to the Taco Bell on Jericho Turnpike. My granddaughter has a kid's meal in a specially printed space case, he has still back there, and receive a gift figure. To use her terms, gross. After describing in detail each distasteful figure printed in the space bag, he asks, "Where is your corporate sense of taste, of decency and appropriateness? Are you people insane? I am inclined to bring this appalling lack of corporate respect for children and society to the attention of both church and the media, and if you won't do something about it very quickly." This is how the first vice president of Shearson Lehman Brothers responded to a letter Sam wrote complaining about receiving a statement in an unsealed envelope. "Dear Mr. Berliner, please accept our apologies for the envelope you received, which was unsealed. We have taken steps to rectify this situation and assure you that our postal machine will never seal, and assure you that our postal machine will seal all envelopes in the future." No doubt Sam was the most complex, brilliant, and challenging man I ever met. He was equally knowledgeable and fascinated by enormous machinery and by miniatures. He could be self-centered and the most generous with his time and energy. He could be critical to the point of involuntarily hurting, but also lavish in giving praise and support. And who could forget his witty, wicked sense of humor? He detested to be called a normal or average person. He described himself as a dedicated, smart, blankety know-it-all, as a churlish man, a master nitpicker, as having a short fuse. He was aware of the consequences of activating that fuse and was often regretful and apologetic when he did. I admire his candor and vulnerability when in his sermon titled An Appropriate Response, he shared the ground rules for letting off steam safely, sanely, and constructively. He recognized that his credentials for this were dubious, since, as he confessed, being more intuitive than reason, more emotional than rational, and more volatile than disciplined, I tend to be an abuser of words and sensitivities. He cited Publius Cyrus, who lived around 40 years before the Common Era, who said, "I have often regretted my speech, never my silence." It didn't take me long to realize how the burden of internalized shame, anger, and sadness he was carrying were consequences of the bullying suffering in school, the several tragedies in his early and later life, the rejections, the accusations of laziness when he couldn't complete assignments due to his undiagnosed dyslexia and ADD. He told me how relieved he felt when, at the age of 40, a doctor finally had diagnosed his dyslexia, and later when another had diagnosed his ADD. Like his father, he had heart disease, having the need to heart open surgery. Additionally, his loss of hearing and sight caused much suffering and frustration. Yet, I admire the way he carried with dignity and resilience his health problems, and how he tried to keep up an attitude of joy and gratitude despite of all. He recounted over and over how his fondest memories were of the time spent with his little daughters, singing and telling stories to them. When they grew up, talking to them, to his grandchildren, sister, and nephew, provided the most enjoyment in his life. After a long wait for his first computer and printer, that was when they were just coming out, on December 19, 1963, at 10:99 p.m., he wrote, "Happiness is a monster business computer and a printer all your own. I had grievously missed my old IBM memory typewriter, but this is so much better and well worth the wait." It was at his computer where he spent most of the time building his massive website and communicating with his numerous fans and mentees around the world. When he learned about the abandoned Long Island Motor Parkway, the first dedicated road for auto races, it became his quest to bring it to public attention and to seek the means to restore it as much as possible. To that end, he formed the Long Island Motor Parkway panel, of which he was the convener for long years. How many times we went together, shears in hand, to clear brambles to discover with excitement chunks of asphalt or any other feature of that parkway. The picture on the altar is of Sam in one of his rescue visits to this beloved motor parkway. The Berlin Werke 3, or the C-scale Berliner Works, was another of his treasured projects. He worked very hard to replicate in his model railroad and in Z-scale the world-famous horseshoe curve of Altona, Pennsylvania. He documented his step-by-step progress and setbacks on his website to the delight and benefit of his enthusiastic followers. Sam had many acquaintances and few lifelong friends with whom he corresponded regularly. Taiso Kitami from Japan was one of them. Sam studied enough Japanese to be able to salute and send good wishes to him in that language. He did the same with his Chinese friend, Yu Fang. He corresponded in decent Magyar with the minister of the Bordeaux Church, his partner church in Transylvania, and enjoyed practicing his German with his friend Matt Stan, the creator of the Cyclops. He warmed my heart every time he said those beautiful terms of endearment in Spanish he had created for me. To me, Sam was a Renaissance man, really. His faith was very important to him. In a letter to a Presbyterian priest dated 1990, he wrote, "My faith is based to a large degree on the idea that I am so filled with awe and wonder that I have no room for fear. Therefore, I believe in fearlessly facing the mysterium tremendum, the great unknown. I rejoice in the unknown and the mysterious, for they remind me of how much I have yet to learn." He added, "In spite of my mighty arrogance, my lack of humility or fear, in the face of the tremendum, I am not lost to the infinite as to deny the possibility that I may be wrong and be just such. I'd rather be God's instrument and willing than unaware." After pondering the question, "Just who are you to think that you can change the world?" he responded, "Certainly, some mix of pride and fear, laughter and agony, caring and disdain, capability and clumsiness, confidence and uncertainty, hope and despair. Still, to make an impact in this life, I had to make a difference." Among the qualities that Sam had, his generosity and gratitude were paramount. He wrote and often said, "Let our every thought and moment be one of celebration. Let our every gift be answered by our gratitude for our great good fortune in our existence and awareness. One of the best gifts Sam gave me was when he built me my first labyrinth in our backyard in New York. The first time I mentioned labyrinth, he said, "That is voodoo mumbo jumbo and superstition." Halfway into building it, when I remarked that he looked happy making this spiritual tool, he said, "I am doing it because I enjoy the beauty of the design, that is all." Yet, I was moved by what he said when he was about to finish his labor of love. "Every handful of sand, every stone I put here has become a sacred thing." Although his energy was so weak, he was my worship associate during a Christmas service I led 9 days before he died. Without question, the ultimate and most treasured gift Sam gave me was his dying at home. He was so peaceful. At one point, I asked him, "Are you seeing your mommy and your daddy and Peggy and Patsy?" And he smiled. About 2 hours after that, he faced the mysterium tremendum, the great unknown, fearless and with joy, I am sure, as his faith demanded and as he had proclaimed so many times he will do. Let us now rise and sing, "Come, Soul of all things."
Joy. That's the first word that comes to mind when I think of my dad. He looked for it in everything he did, and he was pretty much able to find it. He woke up each day with a hunger to learn, to discover, to share, and to soak up all that life and nature and humanity had to offer. Dad had so many passions. Although they consumed him, mostly they weren't of much interest to me. But every once in a while, there were wonderful intersections. Dad was very protective of his massive train layout that lived on one side of the basement of my childhood home. Did I say protective? His area was walled off with sheeting, and there was no entering and playing with these precisely and painstakingly created engines and boxcars and the perfectly scaled replica of Pennsylvania's Horseshoe Curve. On the other side of the basement was my perfect teenage hangout. Old porch furniture, ping pong, knock hockey, my collages decorating the walls. One Halloween, I threw a huge party. Now, especially in those days, I considered my dad a nerd. Lovable, fun, but a serious nerd. Imagine Dad's thrill and my amazement as my big, muscular jock friends swarmed around my dad and his incredible trains. Instead of zero common ground, they found hours of entertainment with Dad as their engaging guide. He was absolutely king of his castle that night and loved telling that story many, many times over the years. Dad and I shared a love of aquariums, zoos, and museums and explored many of them together. Another love we shared was of my two children. Dad couldn't necessarily be relied upon to remember any of our birthdays or to return a phone call in what most would consider a timely fashion. But anytime, and I mean anytime, it involved my kids, he would somehow miraculously become Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way. He was on time, the kids were fed, and he would take them on all kinds of adventures. Sometimes I even got to tag along. Let's face it, my dad was a kid at heart, which made him so great with all children and a jolly Santa Claus for many. Dad walked to one beat, his own. I don't think there was a day in his life that he didn't experience or inspire wonder and sheer delight in being on this earth. It was a great gig that he enjoyed to the fullest.
I'm going to tell you a few stories about cars. But really, they will be about my dad, I promise. In 1970, my parents left New York for Washington, D.C. in an awesome gray convertible. They returned in a burnt orange monstrosity known as the Duster. It was a two-door, three-speed manual transmission and with horrible black vinyl seats. I admit that as a small child, I really only cared about the horrible vinyl seats. Over time, my mother drove the car for a bit, then my sister. As it came time for me to get my driver's license, I told my father I didn't want to drive that piece of junk. At this point in the car's life, it had a rust hole big enough to pass the spare tire through, and the front end was pushed in, which left a big spike poking out the driver's side front. The parking brakes certainly didn't work anymore, and the horrible vinyl seats were shredded. Along comes my birthday, and my father hands me a box with great glee, and he had such an expectation of my happiness. I open the box, and it's a set of car keys. Now I'm really excited. He's giving me a car, wow. And I look at the keys, and sure enough, it's the Duster. He was so happy. He was so happy. So I take the car. It's better than nothing, right? Well, maybe. I begin a year-long odyssey of driving that car and breaking down all over Long Island. But you know what? Dad came and rescued me every time. Every single time. And then we got to spend some time together as we drove home. Fast forward a few years, and I'm a debt-ridden college student who desperately needs reliable transportation. Maybe I had a thing for junkers after that, I don't know. Dad agrees to help me buy a new Honda. No more junkers for me. Does he co-sign a loan? No. He insists he will buy the car, and he will put it in his name, and I will pay him over time. That's all he's willing to do. I don't have a lot of choice, so I agree, grateful that I will have a car. When I finally finish paying off the car, I now have to buy the car from him to get it in my name. So I paid a lot of sales tax on that car. But again, he helped me, and things are always interesting with my dad. To this day, I still drive a manual transmission car, and I enjoy it. And every time I think about driving and shifting, I think about my dad. I like this. It means he's with me all the time.
Preparing to come up here, I did some looking back through some of the family albums that are online, and it turns out that my uncle was not the giant of a man that I thought he was. Growing up, my uncle was huge. He was gianty. He was the guy that would pick you up by your hands and let you walk up him. And even when I became older than, or not older, but taller than him, he still seemed like a giant to me. Most of my life was spent waiting for Sam, or it seemed like most of it was. Whether we were driving up to Long Island or up to the city to see Grandma, or going out to Long Island for Thanksgiving, it was, when will we get there? And it was even worse when he used to come to visit, because he might have seen a street he hadn't been down, a railroad track he hadn't followed, a squirrel. Something would spark his interest. And instead of him arriving for dinner, it was arriving for a late dinner, or maybe we would see him for dessert or breakfast, maybe dinner the next day. He would eventually get there. And as I was driving up to come up here, I purposely meandered. And as I was driving along the side of a sort of a ridge, it was a little bit of a misty thing, and all I could think about was he was the kind of guy that would take his daughter and his nephew down the Skyline Drive to see Luray Caverns and let us stand up in the sunroof while moving with just a hand on the back of a belt loop. But we had fun. He instilled in me a lifelong love of learning things I don't need, trivia, facts that may or may not be in error, but I'll take them as facts. That history translated so well to me. As my mother used to annoy me, I would point out that she was turning into her mother, and she would retort that I was turning into her brother. But that was useful because he understood things like maybe taking some time off from college, maybe not going into a career that's normal, maybe not having a normal life with my kids. He was a great example to me of how to be a good parent, even though you're not necessarily living together with their mom. So the most poignant thing, or the memory that is seared in me for Sam, is watching him, a very good family friend, my grandmother and my mom, arguing over little minutia of history, something way back in the Dark Ages that no one could possibly know, but everyone had their opinion on it. Everyone was right. When I mentioned this to my sister and I, my dad would just sort of sit at our end of the table and just nod, because we couldn't possibly keep up in that conversation. But my sister's words to me were, well, Sam and Mom and Grandma are together in the afterlife. Each of them has their own view of what it is, and each one of them is right.
this is one time when going last is good. I wondered whether there were some things I should talk about or what was off limits. I found there's nothing off limits with this. Be careful not to say something that might embarrass someone. I don't think that's possible now. I'm from Mobile, Alabama, Africatown, really, just up on the fringes of Mobile. And Sam is from Manhattan. Very similar, right? No. But we had a lot in common, and one of the things was he had a sense of humor. And now I see it's bloodline related. Sam gave me an email he received from his sister years ago. And it says, if a man is alone in the forest speaking his mind, and there's no woman present, is he still wrong? I said, Sam, yes, you're still wrong. Another, I had a little problems when I was a kid, actually in kindergarten. I played hooky for 4 days. And Sam says, well, when I was a kid, my parents insisted that I have some cultural aspects associated with the synagogues, and therefore they took me there. After a few times on Saturday, they decided I could go alone. I knew how to travel on the subway, etc. And I did religiously for a few days, a few times. But then I decided it'd be a good time to go to Coney Island. And so I went to Coney Island on time and got back home on time, did this several times, and enjoyed the Nathan's hot dogs. I said, well, Sam, you weren't supposed to do that. He said, yeah, that's why I did it. So he did have a sense of humor. He talked about stories on the radio. One of them was the Gildersleeve. Gildersleeve was an undertaker. That was and it was on the life of Riley. And the undertaker was called Digby Odell, but Sam decided to call him Digger Odell. And he talked to me about that and talked to me about Duffy's Tavern, Fibber McGee and Molly. So we had discussions that were not all intellectual, I guess you could possibly see. But he had a side about him that was quite different in terms of wanting to justify things, of have justice for everyone, have equality for everyone. And that was very important to him. He gave a sermon last August for the church. And in that sermon, he had a lot to talk about with regard to a sermon that was written by his present wife. And it talked about equality, talked about justice, talked about honor, talked about the fact that everyone should be treated equally and have at least the opportunity for love. That was very strong in him. In his last sermon, he gave a response similar to what was given in that sermon by his wife. And it had to do with what can we do to make things better. One thing was about tribalism. And tribalism is thought to perhaps be separate from others, but there could be a tribe. And this was by an author called Alberto Blanco. And you should have tribalism, but have it large enough so that others could be invited into it. Make it a large tribe. Make it a strong tribe, one in which nobody's left out, in which everybody, for once and for all, have a God-given place. It was Sam's idea that we should work together to make things come together, to make the community what it should be, not what it is necessarily. And if we keep our eye on the prize, in a sense, we'll be able to achieve that. Having a memorial service for Sam is not enough for me. I feel it is my duty, as well as the duty of the people who loved and respected him, to try and do our best to be our best. In doing so, perhaps would make the difference to achieve the dream of community that he had in mind. He had a title called a Purtive Professor. One, maybe some kind of a professor, a possible professor. But his last statement he made was professorial, to say the least. He said, with the solemnity of a true professor, work hard to accomplish this so that we learn to come together and love together. And he ended by saying it in a solemn manner, may it be so.
As Harris has so beautifully demonstrated, and as we've named before, Sam was passionate about Unitarian Universalism and its principles. I was very moved when Lilia asked that part of the service include a time where the family make contributions to 2 ministries here that were particularly meaningful to Sam. So I invite Shani and Astrid to come forward, and they will be giving gifts first to the music program and then to our youth program. So maybe if you come up here on the chancel. And so I invite forward our Director of Music, John Kramer, to receive the first gift.
I think you will all agree with me. Sam always let you know what he liked and what he didn't like, and that included the music. And I'm grateful that he liked more than he didn't like here. He will be deeply missed, and thank you so much for the generosity.
Thank you, John. And I now invite forward our Director of Youth Ministry, Sam Wilson, to receive a gift towards our youth program.
Thank you so much from me and from all of the youth. I think Sam and I had a mutual adoration for each other, and I feel pretty blessed that he actually never complained to me about anything. So he loved the youth services. He would always give me lots of accolades after them. So thank you so much.
My father wrote this in 1980. Eternity and the Horseshoe Crab. Last night, as I stood on the seawall at the beach and wondered at the suck of the sound and the color and organisms that, accelerated by the incredible heat, multiplied to form a red tide, there came the great granddaddy of all horseshoe crabs. Floating along listlessly, propelled hither and yon by the waves, he was the biggest specimen I ever recall seeing. So big that he had a mantle of good-sized barnacles, some 50 to 100 of them, which in no way diminished his appearance, but rather emphasized it. There was a hole in his carapace, rough-shaped, about the size of a nickel, and the seawater squirted in and out with each wave. The literal drift carried him along slowly, and the waves pulled him back and forth. His enormity in shape and age pulled at me, and I toyed with the idea of lifting him from the water. Would he desiccate properly before rotting? What would I do with such a giant anyway? Had he died long since of the blow that holed his back, or had the red tide done him in? Had he perhaps died of sheer old age, which well he might have done? So many unanswered and unanswerable questions, as in all of life. So I stood there, still unmoving, and thought of time, of the immense span which this once living fossil represented, of the great changes which have been wrought in his own lifetime, and of course, the changes sweeping over me here and now. As I pondered weightily on such matters, he slowly turned away and sculled gently but powerfully against the tide into deep water. Perhaps he was aware of me looming above him and decided that since I made no move, I was not alive, and therefore not worth the attempt at communication after all.
We close with a benediction that Sam wrote, my Benedictus. May we and those we love bless one another and keep one another. May we make our faces to shine upon one another and be gracious unto one another. May we lift up our faces unto one another and give one another peace this day and forevermore. Amen.